The first 10 minutes were for looking. I examined her the way my father examined a finished pot, turning it, studying it, checking every surface. I looked at her face, which was mine and Eustace's, combined in proportions I could already detect, my chin, his forehead, a nose that was her own, belonging to neither of us. I looked at her ears, which were perfect, small and flat against her head, the cartilage so thin I could see light through it. I looked at her feet, which were impossibly small, the toes like kernels of corn, each one complete, each one with a nail so tiny it was barely visible. I counted the toes, 10, the fingers, 10. Everything was there. Everything was correct, except the one thing that could not be seen and could not be fixed. After the first 10 minutes, when I had catalogued everything I could see, I began to give her the things I could not see, the things she would not have, the life. I closed my eyes and I held her and I gave her the first year. I gave her the summer of 1859, lying on a blanket in the yard while I worked the garden, watching the clouds with the serious attention that babies give to moving things. I gave her the autumn, sitting in a basket beside me while I harvested the last of the beans. I gave her the winter, held close against the cold, wrapped in the quilt my mother had made for Hiram, which would have been hers now. I gave her the spring of 1860, her first birthday, though there would be no party because she was a farmer's daughter, and farmers did not have parties, just an extra something at dinner, a cake maybe, and Eustace would have carved something for her, a small wooden animal, because that is what Eustace did. I gave her the years between 1 and 5, walking. She would have walked early, I decided, because she was strong. That grip told me she was strong, and strong babies walk early. First steps in the kitchen, holding the edge of the table Eustace built, and the first steps would be toward me because I would be the one she walked toward, arms out, unsteady, determined, first words. I decided her first word would be more, because she would be a child who wanted more of everything, more food, more stories, more time outside, more time with the clay, more, and I would give her more because that is what mothers do. They give more until there is no more to give. I gave her school, the one-room schoolhouse on the Cooper Mill Road where I had gone as a girl. She would be good at reading, I decided, quick with numbers, impatient with sewing, which I had been impatient with too. She would come home with mud on her dress because she had been exploring the creek behind the schoolhouse, and I would scold her without meaning it and wash the dress, and she would do it again the next day. I gave her the pottery. This was the part I spent the most time on because this was the part that was most mine to give. I would teach her to work clay. I would put her hands on the wheel and show her how to center, and she would fail at first. Because everyone fails at first, the clay wobbles and collapses, and you want to force it, and forcing does not work. You must persuade it, and she would learn to persuade it because she had my hands. I could feel that she had my hands, broad and strong and meant for shaping, and she would sit at the wheel, and the clay would yield to her, and she would make something, and she would look at me, and I would say, fit for sale, and she would know what that meant, and she would be proud. I gave her adolescence, which I spent less time on because adolescence is difficult, and I did not want difficulty in this hour. I gave her a friend, a girl from the next farm, and I gave her arguments with me because daughters argue with their mothers, and the arguments are a form of love that neither party recognizes until later. I gave her a first dance at a church social in Zanesville, and a boy whose name I did not assign because the boy was not important. The dancing was important. The feeling of being young and alive and capable of joy was important, and I gave her that feeling in full measure. I gave her a husband, a good man. I did not give him a face or a name, but I gave him good hands because hands were what I knew and hands were what mattered. And a man with good hands would hold her properly, and she deserved to be held properly because she was being held properly now in this hour by hands that knew how, and I wanted her to have that again later from someone else, someone who would hold her the way I was holding her, with everything, with the whole self. I gave her children. 2, a boy and a girl. I gave her the experience of holding her own child for the first time and knowing the weight and the warmth and the grip and understanding finally, in that moment, what I was feeling now, in this hour, in this room, holding her. I gave her that understanding because it was the most important thing I possessed, and she should have it. I gave her old age, gray hair, a chair by the window, grandchildren running through a house she and her good-handed husband had built. I gave her 80 years. I furnished every decade. I populated every room. I built her a life as carefully as Eustace built the cradle, joint by joint, piece by piece, and the life was real inside my mind, and it is real still, 68 years later, as real as anything I have experienced in the 595,680 hours since, more real in some respects, because the things I imagined for Louisa were given with a concentration and a love that ordinary life, with its distractions and its diffusions, cannot match. I opened my eyes. Perhaps 40 minutes had passed, perhaps 45. I do not know exactly because I was not watching the clock. I was watching her, and the two are not the same kind of time. She was still breathing. The breaths were slower now. The blue had deepened. Her grip on my finger had loosened, not released, loosened, and the loosening was the thing that told me the hour was approaching its end. Eustace was beside me. He had not spoken. He had been there the whole time, his hand on her head, his carpenter's hand that had built the cradle that would never be used, resting on the skull of the child who would never sleep in it. His face was wet. He was crying in the way that men of that era cried, silently, without acknowledging it, the tears simply falling without permission, as though they had decided independently of the man that they would come. Mrs. Comstock was by the window. She was crying too. She had delivered many babies in Muskingum County. She had delivered babies who died. She had seen this before, but she was crying and she did not try to hide it, and I was grateful because someone in the room should cry openly, and it could not be me because I was busy. I was busy holding. The breathing changed again, became intermittent, a breath, then nothing, then a breath. Each nothing was longer than the last. I counted the nothings the way I had counted everything else. 2 seconds of nothing, then a breath, 4 seconds of nothing, then a breath, 6 seconds, 8. Each breath was a smaller thing, a quieter thing, the body producing less and less of what it could not sustain, winding down the way a clock winds down when nobody turns the key. I said her name, Louisa. I said it close to her ear, close enough that my breath moved the fine hair on her temple. Louisa. I said it, and I meant it as every word I could not say in the time I had been given. I meant it as I love you, and I am here, and you are not alone, and I am sorry, and you were beautiful, and your grip was strong, and you deserved more than this, and I would have given you 80 years if the hour was mine to extend, but it was not, and I am sorry for that too. The last breath was so small, I almost missed it, a tiny drawing in, barely a movement of the chest, and then nothing, and then nothing. And then the nothing continued, and it has been continuing for 68 years. The weight did not change. That is what people do not tell you. When a baby dies in your arms, the weight does not change. 6 pounds before, 6 pounds after. The same. The difference is not weight. The difference is something else, something I have never been able to name, a quality that is present in a living body and absent in a body that is not living, and the transition between the two happened while I was holding her, and I felt it leave. I felt it go through my hands, through my potter's hands that could feel the difference between wet clay and dry clay, and could feel the moment when the wheel slowed, and could feel the precise second when a glaze was ready. These hands felt my daughter's life leave her body and pass through the blanket and through my skin and into the air, and it was gone and she was still there, but the thing that made her Louisa was not. They let me hold her for another hour, 2 hours total. I did not distinguish between them. Both hours were holding. In the first hour she was warm and breathing and gripping and alive. In the second hour she was cooling and still, and the grip was open, and she was not alive. But both hours were mine. I used all of it. Eustace built the coffin, cherry wood, the same cherry wood he had used for the cradle. I watched him from the bedroom window, working in his shop, cutting and planing and fitting, and his movements were the same movements he had used on the cradle, precise, careful, the joints fitted without nails, held together by the fit of the parts, and I understood that he was building the same thing twice, a container for his daughter, one for sleeping and one for the ground, and the wood did not know the difference, and the hands did not distinguish between the two tasks, and the love in the making was the same. We buried her on the hill behind the farm. March in Muskingum County is uncertain, sometimes mud, sometimes frost, and this march was mud. Eustace dug the hole himself. He would not let anyone help. The minister came from Zanesville and said words I did not hear because I was not listening to words. I was listening to the absence of breathing, which had been the sound of my world for 1 hour and which had become the silence of my world for the rest of my life. I had 4 more children after Louisa. I will not name them here. They lived, they grew, they are alive now, most of them. And they have children and grandchildren, and they have had thousands and thousands of hours each, and I am glad of every one. But this story is not about them. They will forgive me for this. They have had their mother for decades. Louisa had her for 1 hour. This hour belongs to Louisa, and I will not divide it. The cradle is in my bedroom. Cherry wood, smooth as skin. It has been empty for 68 years. I dust it every Wednesday. I run my hands along the rim, the same rim I touched when Eustace first brought it in, and the wood is warm from the air in the room, and if I close my eyes and run my hands along it, I can feel the ghost of the purpose it was made for, the weight it was built to hold, the rocking it was shaped to do. It has never rocked. It has never held a sleeping child. It has held nothing but air for 68 years. But I keep it because Eustace built it for Louisa, and it is the only thing in this world that was made specifically for her. And I will not put it in the attic, and I will not give it away. And when I die, it will go into the ground with me or be burned. I have not decided which, but it will not hold another child. It is hers, empty or not. I have lived approximately 595,680 hours since the 1 hour that Louisa lived. I have calculated this, and I recalculate it each year on the anniversary, adjusting for the additional 8,160 hours that another year provides, 595,680 hours. I have filled them as well as I could. I have worked and loved and raised children and buried a husband and grown old and done the 1,000 things that a woman does across a long life in Muskingum County, Ohio. Some of those hours were joyful, some were painful, most were ordinary, the hours of cooking and cleaning and mending and sleeping and waking that constitute the bulk of any life. None of them were as full as the one, not the birth of my son Hiram, though that hour was full of joy, not the hour Eustace asked me to marry him, though that was full of promise, not any hour of any day of any year in the 68 years since. None of them contained what that 1 hour contained, because that 1 hour contained everything, a whole life, 80 years of living that I gave to a girl who had 60 minutes, constructed in my mind and delivered through my hands and inhabited by a person who will never know she lived it, but who lived it nonetheless because I lived it for her, and I have not stopped living it, and I will take it with me when I go, the whole 80 years of it, the first steps and the first words and the clay and the wheel and the good-handed husband and the children and the grandchildren and the chair by the window, all of it, 80 years packed into 40 minutes of imagining by a 22-year-old woman holding a baby whose heart could not hold. They will tell you an hour is not enough. They are wrong. An hour is a life. I know because I held one. 1 hour, 60 minutes, 3,600 seconds. That is how long my daughter lived. I have counted it in every unit of measurement I know, because counting is what you do when a thing is so small that you must break it into the smallest possible pieces to make it feel like enough. I have broken that hour into minutes, and the minutes into seconds, and the seconds into heartbeats. Hers, not mine. Hers were faster, a small rapid drumming I could feel through the blanket against my chest, and if I count the heartbeats, there were perhaps 7,000 of them in that hour. 7,000 times her broken heart managed to push blood through a body it was not built correctly to sustain. 7,000, that is more than 60, more than 3,600. 7,000 sounds almost generous when you say it aloud. It is not generous. It is an insult dressed in arithmetic. But it is what I was given, and I have held it for 68 years, and I will tell you now what fits inside an hour when an hour is all you have. My name is Temperance Hazel Woodruff. People call me Tempe, have called me Tempe since I was small, because Temperance is a church name, and I was never much of a church woman. I was born on the 6th of January, 1837, in Muskingum County, Ohio, outside the town of Zanesville, in a house my father built on a hill above the Muskingum River, where the clay is red and the hills fold into each other like hands, and you can stand on the ridge behind the pottery and see 3 counties in the haze. I am 90 years old. I have lived long enough that people treat my continued existence as a kind of performance, something to be remarked upon and applauded, as though surviving were an accomplishment rather than a condition I have not yet found the exit from. I am not interested in my longevity. I am interested in 1 hour on a March afternoon in 1859, and I have been interested in that hour and only that hour for 68 years, and I expect I will be interested in it for whatever time remains to me, which at 90 cannot be much, and which I will measure in hours, because that is how I measure everything now. My father was Gideon Grigsby. He was a potter, made stoneware in Zanesville, which was pottery country, the clay capital of southeastern Ohio. The hills were full of it, red clay, dense and workable, and men like my father dug it from the hillsides and wedged it and shaped it on wheels and fired it in kilns that burned so hot the air above them shimmered like water. He made crocks and jugs and jars and bowls, the plain, sturdy vessels that every household in the county used for storing pickles and sauerkraut and lard and cider. Nothing beautiful, everything functional. My father did not believe in decoration. He believed in walls thick enough to hold what they were meant to hold, and lips smooth enough to pour from, and bottoms flat enough to sit level on a shelf. He made things that worked. That was his measure. Does it work? Does it hold? Does it do what it was made to do? My mother, Celia Grigsby, worked beside him. She glazed the finished pieces, painting the salt glaze on with a brush she made from hog bristle, coating each pot with the mixture that would seal it in the kiln's heat. She was a small woman with hands that were permanently stained from the glaze, a brownish discoloration in the creases of her palms and under her fingernails that no amount of scrubbing removed. She did not mind. Hands are for using, she said. If your hands are clean, you have not done anything worth doing today. I grew up with clay under my fingernails. I could center a lump on the wheel by the time I was 8, could pull a cylinder by 10, could shape a crock by 12 that my father deemed fit for sale, which was the highest praise he offered. He did not say good work or well done. He said fit for sale, which meant it met his standard, which meant it would hold what it was meant to hold, which meant it worked. I understood the world through my hands before I understood it through anything else. Touch was my first language. Weight, temperature, texture, the resistance of clay when it is too dry, the collapse of clay when it is too wet, the precise moment when the material yields to your hands and becomes what you are asking it to become. I shaped things. That was what I did, what I was. A woman who shaped things with her hands. I tell you this because the holding matters, and the holding cannot be understood without understanding the hands that did it. These were not soft hands, not gentle hands, not the hands of a woman who had been raised to embroider and play piano. These were a potter's hands, broad across the palm, strong in the fingers, calloused at the base of the thumb where the clay presses when you are centering. These were hands that knew how to hold things, how to support from beneath, how to apply pressure without crushing, how to feel through the skin what the material needs before the material knows it needs it. When they placed my daughter in these hands, the hands knew what to do. The rest of me did not. But the hands knew. I married Eustace Woodruff in the autumn of 1857. I was 20. Eustace was a carpenter by trade and a farmer by necessity, as most men in Muskingum County were something by trade and a farmer by necessity because the land was there, and it needed working, even if it was hilly and rocky and only marginally cooperative. He had 40 acres east of Zanesville, steep ground, half of it wooded, the tillable portion barely adequate for corn, and a kitchen garden and a few hogs. He supplemented with carpentry work, building furniture and cabinets, and occasionally a house for the families in the surrounding hollows. He was good with wood the way I was good with clay. He understood the grain, knew when to cut with it and when to cut against it, knew which wood would hold a joint and which would split. Cherry was his favorite. He said cherry wood was honest. It showed you what it was. Did not pretend to be something finer or something rougher. Just was itself, warm and close-grained and willing to be shaped. Our first child, Hiram, was born in June of 1858, healthy, strong. A boy who arrived yelling and did not stop yelling for what seemed like the first year of his life. Eustace was pleased. I was pleased. We were young, and the farm was producing, and the carpentry work was steady, and Hiram was healthy, and the world seemed arranged in a manner that suggested it would continue to be so, which is what the world does before it shows you otherwise. I became pregnant again in the summer of 1858. By autumn, I was feeling the baby move. Quick fluttering movements at first, like a fish turning in a bowl, then stronger kicks by winter, definite, assertive. I knew it was a girl. I cannot explain how I knew this. It was not intuition in the mystical sense. It was knowledge that came through the body, through the hands, through the same sensory intelligence that told me when clay was ready and when it was not. The baby moved differently from Hiram. Lighter, quicker, more frequent, I knew. I did not name her before the birth because naming before birth was considered unlucky in our family and in the county generally. You did not name a thing until you could hold it and see what it was. This was a potter's principle as well. You did not name the vessel until it came off the wheel because the clay might have ideas of its own about what it wanted to become. Eustace built a cradle, cherry wood. He worked on it through the winter of 1858 to 1859, shaping the pieces in his workshop behind the house, fitting the joints by hand without nails, because he said a cradle should be held together the way a family is held together, by the fit of the parts, not by something driven through them. It was the finest piece of work Eustace ever produced. The wood was sanded so smooth it felt like skin. The rockers curved with a precision that allowed the slightest touch to set it moving. He finished it in February and brought it into the bedroom and set it beside the bed, and I looked at it and I put my hand on the rim and I thought, this is where she will sleep. Before we continue, a quick word. I've released 14 full recordings that will never be on YouTube. These are the voices too personal, too raw to share publicly, completely unedited, nothing cut. If you want access, the link is in the description. It's called The Lost Recordings, and getting it helps us keep making these videos. All right, back to the story. March the 11th, 1859, a Wednesday. The labor began before dawn. The midwife, Mrs. Comstock, from the neighboring farm, arrived within the hour. Eustace was sent to the kitchen with Hiram, who was 9 months old and unaware of anything except his own requirements. The labor was hard, harder than Hiram's, longer. Mrs. Comstock said nothing was wrong, that some babies take their time, that the body knows what it is doing. I gripped the bed frame and I pushed, and I did what the body required me to do, which was to work, to labor, the word itself being correct, because birth is the hardest physical work I have ever done, harder than wedging clay, harder than loading a kiln, harder than anything, and the body does it with or without your cooperation. She was born at 2:30 in the afternoon. She came out making a sound, not the full-throated yell Hiram had produced, a thinner sound, a mewing, like a kitten. Mrs. Comstock caught her and placed her on my chest, and I looked at her, and she was small, smaller than Hiram had been, and her eyes were open, dark and wet and blinking at the light, and her mouth was working, opening and closing as though she was trying to say something and had not yet learned how, and she was alive. She was alive, and I felt her against my chest, and the weight of her was real, and the warmth of her was real, and for a moment, for perhaps 30 seconds, the world was exactly as it was supposed to be. Then I saw Mrs. Comstock's face. It changed, a specific change, the competent, encouraging expression that midwives maintain during deliveries, the expression designed to reassure the mother that everything is proceeding as expected. That expression fell away, and what was behind it was fear. She was looking at the baby's color, which I now noticed was not the red I expected, not the angry flush of a newborn adjusting to air, but something bluer, a tinge, faint but present, in the fingers around the mouth, as though the blood was not carrying what it should. Mrs. Comstock said we should send for Dr. Harmon. She said it calmly. She was a good midwife, and she did not alarm mothers unnecessarily. But I heard what the calm was covering, and I pulled my daughter closer, and I said, "What is wrong?" And Mrs. Comstock said, "It may be nothing. Let the doctor look." Eustace went for Dr. Harmon. He rode fast. Dr. Harmon was 3 miles away, and Eustace covered the distance in what I was later told was an extraordinary time, though I did not experience it as time. I experienced it as holding. I held my daughter on my chest, and I felt her breathe, the shallow, quick breaths of a newborn whose lungs are working but whose body is not receiving what the lungs are providing. And I watched the blue tinge, and it did not go away, and I spoke to her, whispered to her, the nonsense that mothers whisper to new babies, the sounds that are not words but are the language underneath words, the language of "this is your mother and I am here and you are safe." Dr. Harmon arrived. He was an older man, gray-bearded, steady in his movements. He examined the baby on the bed beside me. He listened to her chest. He placed his ear against her small body, and he listened for a long time, and when he raised his head, his face was arranged in a way that I recognized from Mrs. Comstock's face and from every face I would see for the rest of my life when people were about to tell me something that could not be fixed. He told me the baby's heart was malformed. He used a word I did not know then and have since learned was the only word available to him, which was insufficient because the science of hearts in 1859 was insufficient. He said the heart was not constructed correctly, that it was not moving the blood as it should, that the blue color was the evidence of this failure. He said he could not repair it. He said no one could repair it. He said the baby would not survive. I said how long? He said perhaps an hour, perhaps 2. He could not be more precise. I said, "Give her to me." He placed her in my arms. She weighed, I would estimate, 6 pounds. She was wrapped in a blanket Mrs. Comstock had brought, white cotton, soft from many washings. Her face was visible above the blanket. Her eyes were open. The blue tinge was more pronounced now, or I was seeing it more clearly because I knew what it meant. Her fingers were curled. Her mouth was still working, opening and closing, and I realized she was trying to nurse, that her body, despite everything that was wrong with it, was doing what a newborn body is supposed to do, which is seek the mother, seek the warmth, seek the milk, seek the life that the world is supposed to provide. Her body did not know it was dying. Only the heart knew. I will tell you now what I did with that hour. I will tell it in the order it happened, because the order is all I have, the order and the details. The details are what I have polished for 68 years until they are as smooth and hard as fired stoneware, and they will not chip, and they will not fade, and I will not let them. The first minute I held her against my chest, left side, over my heart, so that her ear was against my skin and she could hear my heartbeat, which was doing what hers could not, which was beating correctly, fully, with the steady rhythm of a heart that would go on beating for decades after hers stopped. I wanted her to hear it. I wanted the last thing she heard to be her mother's heart telling her, "This is how it is supposed to sound. This is what you were supposed to have. And I am sorry you did not get it." I named her Louisa. The name arrived without thought, without consultation, without the deliberation that naming usually requires. It was simply there in my mouth the way clay is simply there in the hillside, waiting to be taken and shaped. Louisa. I said it aloud. I said, "Your name is Louisa." Eustace was beside the bed. He heard me say it. He repeated it, Louisa. And for one moment the three of us, Eustace and I and Louisa, were a family in that room, a complete arrangement, a thing that worked. And the moment was real, even though it would not last, and I have held on to it for 68 years with the same grip Louisa held my finger. She gripped my finger. I need to tell you about this because it is the detail I return to more than any other. I placed my index finger against her palm, and her fingers closed around it. The grip was strong, stronger than you would expect from a body that was failing. There was force in it, intention, the reflexive clutch of a newborn that is usually just a reflex, but that I interpreted then and interpret now as purpose. She was holding on. She knew, in whatever way a 1-hour-old person can know anything, that she was holding on to something and she did not want to let go. Neither did I. I have not let go. My finger is still in her grip. 68 years, and the grip has not released because I will not open my hand.